One of the things that I have learned in 17 years here is that Mount Rainier pops up in the strangest places. It's like that thing is on wheels. And one of my favorite views of it is occasionally I drive down Reed Road. And all of a sudden, at one curve in the bend, Mount Rainier just looms, and it is absolutely massive. And when we've had people in town, I'll take them down Reed Road, and I'm like, I do this on purpose so I can go, look at Mount Rainier. It's right there. And I can't tell you how many times I'm in the car with somebody who's telling some long, detailed story about something that happened 20 years ago. And then when they get through with the story, they're like, where you were going to show me Mount Rainier? I'm like, yeah, that was back in the garage sale portion of your discussion. So you know my pain. So my friend Stan Rober had a solution to this. He had some friends who came and they'd never been to the Puget Sound area, and so they wanted to see the area, and so they were going to take them around and just show them, all the beauty that is around us. And Stan had this plan, and I thought it was brilliant. He was like, okay, the conversation in the car can go on just free-flowing unless I raise my hand. If I raise my hand, then all conversation must cease, and you must listen to me because I have something to say. And I love that because I was thinking about Daniel, and we are kind of out of the ordinary with some of the apocalyptic literature that we're going through. And some of you love this. You have your colored pencils out. Some of you have brought your decoder rings from your Trix cereal years ago. And some of you are just sitting here going, this is really weird. When do they start the September service? But God has something to say in the text that we're looking at. And I think it would be really wise, whether you're really thrilled with all this prophetic apocalyptic stuff, or whether you're just tolerating it because it's weird, to take a moment and just consider that God might have his hand raised. And he might be saying to us and to you, I've got something to say in here that might surprise you. Because God has something to say in the middle of the cosmic struggle that we're living in between good and evil, but also into the center of whatever it is that you are dealing with today. And as we look at this text this morning, God is going to speak into what's happening to his people on the global level. But he's also going to speak directly into Daniel's heart for a concern that Daniel has. So we're going to read a relatively lengthy passage. So here's a couple of things to help keep you awake. Listen for comments about horns, and listen for comments about time. Chapter 8. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision, after the one that had already appeared to me. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal, and the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and towards the north and towards the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. And as I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came toward the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at it in great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small, but grew in power to the south and to the east, toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the hosts of heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, "How long will it take for this vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary, and the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people." He said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated." While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man. And I heard a man's voice from the Uli calling, "Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision." As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. "Son of man," he said to me, "understand that the vision concerns the time of the end." While he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet. He said, "I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. The four horns that replaced the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. The vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given to you is true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. I, Daniel, was worn out. I lay exhausted for several days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. So Daniel has a second vision. We talked about the first one last week. And it's not quite as bizarre as the first vision. At least the animals in this vision are recognizable. You got a goat and you got a sheep. The first animals were these mutants. And this time, the vision is fairly easy to understand and to interpret it, especially verses 1 through 8, because it's talking primarily about the king of the Medes and the Persians. One horn is greater, that's the king of Persia, because the Persians were dominant. So that's kind of over to the right of Israel. And then you get this speedy goat who takes over so much so quickly that his feet don't even touch the ground. It's a reference to Alexander the Great and how quickly his kingdom took over the earth. It says, the goat became very great, Alexander, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off. He died when he was 32 or 33. And in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. That's a reference to Alexander's 4 generals who took over his empire. One took over like pretty much the area of Macedon, which is part of Greece. Another headed the Seleucid Empire, which no one has ever heard of before. But the Seleucid Empire took from like the middle of Turkey all the way over through Lebanon, through Syria, through Iraq, into modern-day Iran, and even to Afghanistan. It was a huge swath of the Middle East. And then you have the empire that most everybody has heard of before, whether you know it or not. That's the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt. You know about that because Cleopatra was one of the Ptolemies. That was from Alexander the Great. And so you have this Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt, and you have the Seleucid Empire in Lebanon and right, and there is only one thing between the two of them. One little tiny narrow strip of land, which is Israel. And then I'm going to put together the next 2 passages. Out of one of them came a horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east towards the beautiful land. That's Israel. It grew until it reached the host of heavens and threw some of the host down to earth and trampled at them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Verse 23, in the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will rise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. So let's unpack that just a little bit. The beautiful land is Israel. It's the land caught in between these two major empires. And what it's talking about here, when it's talking about reaching the heights of heaven and bringing down some of the starry hosts and all of that, it's talking about the impact on temple worship. It's not talking about, that something actually reaches up into God's heaven and pulls part of God's heaven down. It's talking about where God meets people on earth, which is the temple in Jerusalem. And it's a reference to when one of the Seleucid kings, Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, that won't be on the test, but it's a fun name to say, Antiochus Epiphanes, he takes over, he marches on Jerusalem, and he takes over the city of Jerusalem, and he puts into the temple what's known as the abomination of desolation. What people think it was a meteor that was put into the Holy of Holies, and then Antiochus sacrifices a pig to it on the holy altar. Well, that was just more than people could be tolerant. It was such a desecration of the temple that it still lives in Jewish people's memory to this day. And because of that, the entire temple system stops. There's no more worship that goes on in the temple. There are no more sacrifices. All the worship of God grinds to a halt at the place where God meets people because of what Antiochus Epiphanes has done in the temple. And when it talks about that truth was thrown to the ground, most people believe that that's a reference to when Antiochus went into the temple and burned all the Torah scrolls. And so it looks like evil is doing pretty well, because what Antiochus is trying to do is to remove the identity of God's people. He's trying to make them Greek so that they'll follow the Greek gods and quit having their distinctive view of who God is and who they are in God's plan. And this was an absolute gut punch to the people of God. Their worship is taken away. Everything that makes them the unique people of God is outlawed. And this is why you get the Maccabean revolt in the early 2nd century. Judas Maccabeus wasn't his last name, it just means hammer, leads a revolt of the people. And this is where we get Hanukkah from. You'll have to read more about that because that's all I'm going to say. But it's such a gut punch to the people that they rise up in rebellion. And it doesn't last all that long because of this line. He will take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Well, who is the Prince of Princes? It's God. And when we've seen throughout the book of Daniel, every time a national leader sets himself up to be God or to be like God, God knocks them down a peg or two. And so that will not be allowed to stand. And the prophecy of Daniel mentions he will be destroyed, but not by human power. So then the obvious question is, if you've got this king who has taken the identity of God's people, if you've got evil running rampant, if you've got people living without hope because their identity is being taken away from them, but God is going to step in one of these days, the obvious question is, when? And that's in verse 13. I'm sorry, it's actually in verse 14. He said to me, well, the question is in verse 13. The answer is in verse 14. How long? When is this going to happen? He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. Well, that's easy to figure out. Now we have a timeline. Yeah, not so much. Because we're still dealing with apocalyptic literature, and the literal words there are evening, morning, 2,300. Okay, turn to your neighbor and figure that out. Nobody knows what that means. Is it 2,000 morning sacrifices and 2,000 evening sacrifices, or 1,500 of each? Nobody knows. Or is it a figurative number? Nobody knows what exactly it means. It's like, a time, and a time and a half from last week. We're like, okay, well, thanks for getting us into the ballpark of what it's talking about. But here's the important point about this limit that has been placed, it's been made over and over and over through the book of Daniel, and that is that there is a time set, that evil only lasts for a while. And if you read the Old Testament carefully, and even the beginning of the New Testament, God's people often ask this question: how long, O Lord? How long? How long is this stuff going to go on? How long until you redeem us? And even though it's this yearning for this thing to happen, like my yearning for my house to sell, I keep going, how long, O Lord, how long? It's also a faith-filled statement, because it's said with, I know that there is a point. But when is the point, God? And so even that yearning of, God, when are you going to do what you promised to do, is still faith-filled, because we know, God, you promised to do it. And I know we can trust in that. And so that's what Daniel gives us. Daniel says it's only for a period. It's only for a period. And God has set a limit on that. But here's the real question that I think comes out of the text, and that is in verse 19. He said, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. You have to ask the question, the end of what? Because the text is not clear. Is it the end of time, or is it the end of this period of suffering? And there's a case to be made for both of them. That this apocalyptic vision is for the people of God living in that situation that is brought up when the Medo-Persian Empire takes over the earth, where Alexander crushes it, and then when the Mediterranean world is divided into four, and evil like the people of God happens that they have never seen before. That was a terrible English sentence, but you got what I meant. That it's to speak into that and to let them know that God will bring an end to that. You can make a very strong case for that. That it's the end of this current suffering. You can also make a fairly strong case that it's also about the end of time. So, because you have paid me for 17 years to be helpful, what's the answer to the question? Is it the end of time, or is it something unique that's happening at the 3rd century BC? And the answer is yes. But that, my friends, is the brilliance of the book of Daniel, because it speaks into our current situations and also speaks into the macro situation. The book offered hope to the people who would be living during the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes. And it has offered hope to people who have suffered under evil empires and unjust treatment and persecution throughout all history since it was written. It offers hope to people in Ukraine and Gaza and Israel and Persia and Sudan and the United States and everywhere else today. But it also offers hope for the future. It offers hope to you in whatever situation you're living in, and it offers hope to your children and your children's children. It offers hope because it reminds us that in all of the great macro conflict between good and evil, evil doesn't win. God does. And it reminds us that in whatever we are dealing with in our own personal lives, whatever our challenges, whatever our temptations, whatever our addictions, whatever bad things that have been done with us that have left us scarred over years, that evil doesn't win there either, that God does. And the whole theme of everything that we've read in the book of Daniel is no matter what it seems like, God is still in control. There are two other things that I want to hit, because this is going to be our last day in Daniel. I'm going to preach on something else next week, plus 17 years worth of things I wanted to say. But there are two other, you won't want to miss it. There are two other things that I want to hit. In the very next chapter, Daniel 9, Daniel, living in the midst of this, says, I looked at the book of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is the prophet who predicts the exile. And he says, I looked at the book of Jeremiah, and I noticed that Jeremiah says that our exile is only supposed to take 70 years. And remember, by this time, Daniel's an old man. And he's like, the way I count it, we're getting pretty close. This thing is almost over. And what jogs Daniel's memory? Why does Daniel get interested in this? It's because if you've noticed clearly in the text, Babylon fell. And the prophecy is, you will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Well, the Babylonian Empire fell. It's the Persian Empire that's on the throne now. And so Daniel is like, hey, we're almost done with this thing. Glory to God. Maybe I will see Jerusalem again. And then as soon as Daniel says this, he realizes what they're doing in Babylon in the first place. They're there because they were not faithful. They're there because they ignored God over and over and over, saying, if you'll follow me, you'll be blessed. If you refuse to follow me, there's going to be severe consequences to that, up to and including exile. And the people continue to ignore God, and God does what he said he would do, and he sends them into exile with the express purpose of using the exile to call them back to himself so that he can bring them back to the promised land, the beautiful land. And Daniel realizes that through 70 years of exile, the people are still unfaithful. And so Daniel prays this beautiful prayer where he asks God for mercy, where he reminds God of his covenant promises, where he acknowledges that Israel has continued to sin, where he acknowledges the reason for the exile, and he asks God to restore them. And God answers, but you haven't been faithful. And because of that, the time's going to be increased. And so we get another helpful biblical timeline at this point. It says we are going to go from 70 years to 70 times 7, or 70 sevens, or 77, or something with sevens. And it's generally thought to mean 490 years. But it also might just mean the perfect amount of time, because 7 is the perfect number. So it's God saying, you will be in exile until the perfect time, until you return with your whole hearts to me. That's how long you will be in exile here. And so the most important thing in thinking about that is that, I think for us, is that it's so easy to focus on external things. It's so easy to focus on what's going on in our country, what's going on politically, what's going on in the global world order. It's so easy to get focused on the news cycle, the podcasts that you listen to, whatever you do to deaden yourself to what's going on. It's so easy to focus on that and to neglect the internal call of God to faithfulness, to continually return to God with the choices that you make in your life. Because whatever your view of politics, and it really doesn't matter to me, your chief priority as a follower of Jesus is to become a fully committed follower of Jesus, whether there is a Democrat or a Republican in the White House. Absolutely, we're called to work for the greater good, to have political engagement, but we do that from a point of deep connection to Jesus. Everything about our politics, everything about the way that we deal with the people around us needs to be informed by a deep daily connection to Jesus, constantly returning back to God. So are you spending more time with your preferred news source, or with the preferred way of deadening yourself to the world, or with your personal spiritual development? Because one or the other will form who you are. And who you are will have serious consequences, not just for you, but for our church, for our community, and if I read this right, for the world. The situation of God's people was extreme. They were in exile, but they missed the call to return to God, and they missed the plan that God had for them. And at the very end of the book of Daniel, the voice comes to Daniel, and he says this, after he's seen all these pictures, because pretty much 9, 10, 11, and 12 are the same vision, just rehashed with a little bit more confusion thrown in. But it ends this way. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. Daniel, you've seen this. And the response that you should have is just go be faithful to what you're called to. Go on your way, Daniel. You've been given this glimpse of what God is doing in the world. Don't just stand there. Okay, you can lay there for 3 days because it was pretty heavy stuff. But Daniel, you've got a call on your life. I've given you meaningful work to do, God says. Now go and do that. And I think in light of what we read in Daniel chapter 9, the chief meaningful work that Daniel was given was to connect deeply with God. And so I think I would ask us the same questions. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world, but each of us has been given a call on our lives. Each of us has been given something by God to do. And God wants us to be faithful in doing that. And then the end will come. So how are we fulfilling what God is calling us to do? How are we developing our relationship with Jesus? How is our relationship with Jesus informing how we look at the world? And I love I've started this new devotional, and it's really helping me daily to say, what do you have to say to me today, God? And it just brings me back to the beginning where I wonder how many times God raises his hand and says, I have something to say. And I'm not listening. The call is to go about the king's business. And then the end will come. So let me ask you 3 questions. Number 1, where does it seem like evil is winning now? Either on the macro level or in your own life. Number 2, how does Daniel's vision encourage you? And number 3, what does God have for you to do right now?